Hello there everyone and welcome back to the GSL-English Podcast. My name is Gideon and this is a podcast for all learners of English to practice and improve in a relaxed and natural way. And that is exactly what we are going to do today because this is the February Natter. It's that episode where we just have a good old catch up and talk about some random topics so you can listen to real and authentic British English. So these episodes are never scripted. Well, actually, none of my episodes are ever fully scripted, but especially these ones. I just talk exactly how I would in any situation, really, just so you can hear what that sounds like and also just get used to hearing natural and authentic English. It isn't always perfect. It isn't always grammatically correct. That's the way it goes. So that's the idea of this episode. And really, that's the idea of this podcast. And if you're a returning viewer or listener, you know what this is about. I do recommend, as always, get comfortable with these episodes. Just relax. You know, there's plenty of podcasts out there for you to study English and grammar and textbooks. This is not that podcast. We go through vocabulary, we go through different expressions, but it's more laid back. I really just want you to chill out, to relax with me, have a bit of a catch up, just like you were listening to a good friend talk about something for 30 to 40 minutes. Well, hopefully a good friend would ask you questions, but we don't have that capability yet. Unless I did a live stream, which has been on my mind a little bit, the possibility of a live stream so I can interact with you there and then. Maybe that's something that could be in the pipeline, meaning that it's going to come in the future. Where was I? That's it. Get comfortable, get cozy, get a blanket, get a cup of tea, a hot chocolate. My wife and I are going through a bit of a hot chocolate phase at the moment. If you know the shop Whittards, you'll know what I'm talking about. They do the most incredible hot chocolates. So if you are in England, even in the London area, I think they even sell them at Gatwick and Heathrow. So if you're travelling to England, check out a Whittards shop. And I would say get one of the best hot chocolates in the world. If you can have hot chocolate while watching this, do. If that's your preference, if that's your kind of thing, get a cup of coffee, get some food, some beans on toast, whatever it is, but just chill out with me. And if you are new here, give it a subscribe, give us a follow. It really does help to keep on creating these episodes and keep the podcast going. But that's enough of an introduction. I waffled on a little bit there. It's what I do. How are you doing? How's your week been? I hope you've had a good week. I always say that, but I genuinely mean it. You know, I do appreciate you taking the time to watch these podcasts and listen to them, but I do genuinely hope you had a good week. I hope life is good for you, and I hope you've had a little bit of time to relax, to unwind. Life certainly is busy, isn't it? There just always seems to be something else to do. Saying that, just as I've said that, I've got notifications come up, emails come through. It's really hard not to get distracted and read them now. But I'm not going to. But yeah, that just highlights there's always something else to do, isn't there? So it's important just to have these moments, just to relax. And hopefully you get to do that with these podcasts, as well as just taking in a bit of the English language. And we're going to develop that theme in a moment because I think most years that I've been doing the podcast, which I think is about 2 or 3 years now, I've always created an episode at the beginning of the year about how to improve your English in that year, just with my tips and my suggestions. I haven't done that this year, and it's something that I'm probably not going to do in the future. I don't think it's something necessarily that an episode needs to be dedicated to, because it's just a continual process. But there's something I want to talk about that perhaps you could set yourself as a goal. And it's something that applies no matter what level you are in English, no matter where you are in your English learning journey. I think what we're going to discuss will most definitely help you to improve this year. This isn't one of those videos, how to get fluent in 2026, because that's more than a video. That's a lot about the mind, and determination. And I think if you are listening to and watching this podcast weekly, then you've got that. You're on that road. You're on that path. So well done. But there's something I want to just share with you, an idea or a thought that, if put into practice, will definitely help us to improve our language skills. But the first thing we're going to discuss is the name of this month, February. Now, my wife said, what are you talking about on the podcast today, on this Friday afternoon? So I said, it's the February Natter. And she said, what's the February Natter? Because she doesn't watch the podcast. She's not a fan like you guys. I know, it's terrible, isn't it? So I told her, it's an episode where we just talk about random topics and blah, blah, blah. But then she said, wait, how do you pronounce February? I said, February. She went, no, it's February. I was like, no, it's February. So we had this long discussion about how to pronounce February. So there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about with that. One, you got two native English speakers there discussing pronunciation. It's constantly evolving. It's constantly developing. And that shows that even amongst native speakers, there's disputes and there's debates. So when you see these Instagram reels or, how to say or sound like a native, well, really, what native are you trying to sound like? So I think sometimes if it's trying to sound like a native, that can be a bit misleading. Of course, sometimes we market this podcast as a native British English podcast because I'm from England, but I'm not requiring that you sound like me. The purpose of this podcast is not sound like me. It's just to listen to native British English. But it kind of got me just thinking, you've got two native speakers there. Okay, my wife is from Manchester. I'm from London, or just outside of London in Kent. She says February. I say February. So there really is, there is a realm that we have to get within with correct pronunciation, but it's always changing. It's always evolving. And as you go throughout England and the United Kingdom, pronunciation changes. So what I'm trying to say is there's not one native correct pronunciation. But I'm going to tell you how I pronounce it. So if you do want to pronounce it like me, which you might not want to, but if you do, February. February. F-E-B-R-E-E. I'm going on holiday in February. I'm watching a podcast in February. This is the February Natter. It's one of those words that the more you say it, it starts to no longer sound like a word. I don't know if you've ever had that in your own language. I've had it so many times when teaching English that I say a word, I'm teaching pronunciation, or we're focusing on that word. I think one word recently was assimilation. And then you say that word so many times that you start to question whether it's actually a word. Have you made it up? But of course, internally, you know that it is an actual word. Has that ever happened to you? Because I'm starting to get it with this word February. That is how I pronounce it, but I'm starting to question, is that even a month of the year? And is that how I pronounce it? So I'm going to stop there with that word. But yeah, February. If you want to sound like my wife, February. You got to bear with me this morning. I did an airport run at 4 o'clock this morning for a friend. An airport run is what we call, just going to pick up a friend or drop them off at the airport. About 6 months ago, I said, yeah, no worries, I'll pick you up from the airport, no problem. Little did I know, their flight got in at 5 o'clock in the morning. So I had to leave at 3:30 this morning. And I'm so tired, I'm kind of spaced out a little bit. So this podcast might be all over the place. But is what it is. But yeah, Heathrow run. So it was at Heathrow, which is the further airport from me. About an hour and a half from Kent. Traffic was a nightmare. And a little kind of public service announcement. If you are dropping off or picking up at any airport in England, always remember that there's a charge. So for Heathrow, if you are in England and you're dropping off a friend or a family member, or you're picking them up, you have to pay £7 within 24 hours of dropping them off. I think that applies to Stansted and Manchester Airport as well. So all the big airports in England, I think majority of airports, you got to pay to do that. If not, you get an £80 fine. So I know that many of you are outside of England, but there are, according to the demographics on YouTube and Spotify, there's a fair amount of you that do live in London. So if you are driving, you're dropping a friend off, or you're doing whatever, make sure you remember to pay that fee online. You just put your number plate in and then you pay it. Otherwise, you get an £80 fine. And I found that out about a year ago the hard way. So, just keep that in mind. So let's go back to what I spoke about earlier, this idea of, improving your English in 2026. This isn't really about 2026, but there's something I think we can get lost in that holds us back and we lose balance on. And that is input versus output. Now, I think one of the best ways, no matter what level you are, if you're a beginner, you're intermediate, you're advanced, you can improve your English, is rebalancing your input and output according to your level. And that's the important part, because there's no fixed amount of how much you should take in and how much you should give out, input and output. I think it is really dependent on your level. So I wanted to talk about this a little bit. So this idea of input and output. So let's first identify, what is input and what is output. Of course, if you're watching this podcast, you can read along with me on the screen. If you're listening, listen carefully to this, because I would love to get your thoughts on it. So, let's just clarify. What are we referring to when we talk about input and output? Input is the English that you consume, that you take in. This can be listening, podcasts, watching YouTube, listening to conversations, reading books, articles, subtitles, social media, listening to the radio. Anything that you consume, like eating food that you take in, is input. It's the language that goes into your brain. So the way that I want us to think about this is input is fuel. So you can think about fuel in your body, fuel for growing plants, fuel for a fire. Input is the fuel that helps that to grow. Without fuel, nothing's going to happen. For example, if we think of a fire, if it's just embers on the ground, without fuel, that fire is not going to stay lit. We have to give it fuel. To live, to exercise, we've got to take in food and nourishment. It's the fuel that keeps us going. Input is the fuel that keeps us going and helps our English to grow, to improve. What is output? Well, it's the result of that fuel. It's the English that we produce, speaking, writing, thinking in English, and so on. It's the language that comes out of your brain. You can think of output as the training. It strengthens what you've absorbed. So just to put this kind of as an illustration, imagine that you wanted to grow muscle. Input is the protein. It's the creatine that everybody's talking about nowadays. It's the fuel. Output is the training that uses that fuel. You've got to have both. But depending where you are, depends how much of a balance you have either way. So we're going to look at why are both essential. So let's think about this idea of input being essential. Why is that true? Well, to put it simply, you cannot say what you have never heard. You cannot write what you have never seen. If it's not going in, it's simply not going to come out, is it? It's not there. So strong input, it builds vocabulary naturally. It teaches grammar subconsciously. It improves pronunciation. It develops that intuition, that instinct for what sounds right. And many learners really underestimate how much input they actually need. It's the same as going to the gym. Many people underestimate how much they need to eat, how much they need to fuel their body to see results, to grow. In fact, research in second language acquisition consistently shows that large amounts of comprehensible input, language you mostly understand, are crucial for progress. If your English feels stuck, it's often coming back to input. You're not getting enough. You're not fueling enough. You're not taking in enough exposure, daily exposure. You're taking in, it's just what you're used to. Your input is too easy. It's not allowing for growth. Or it's too hard. There's no comprehension. So the input is really completely invalidated. It's pointless. So that's why input is so important. If we've not taken anything in, we don't have anything to put out. But why is output also critical? Well, input builds knowledge, output builds skill. Input builds knowledge, output builds skill. When you speak or you write or you use what you've taken in, you notice the little gaps in your vocabulary. You discover those little grammar weaknesses that you struggle with. You start speaking and training your fluency under pressure, and you build confidence. Input builds knowledge, output builds the skills that you need to improve. Output forces your brain to really organise what it knows. And many learners, they understand English very well. They've got the knowledge. But when it comes to output, when it comes to speaking, what happens? They completely freeze. It's an output problem. It's not just an input problem. So we can see that both of these things are essential. Both are critical. Input and output. So how do we stay balanced with it? Well, the common mistake is that some learners only will study grammar rules, or they only listen passively without ever speaking. Both of these approaches, it really makes progress slow. Language improvement is not about memorizing rules. It's about building a system in your brain. And that system needs both exposure and use. It needs inputs and outputs. So what balance is that? Well, I did a bit of research on this, and this is what a few studies said. Now, this isn't law or fact, but it's just an idea to go by. So it said that if you're a beginner level, you want about 80% input and 20% output. Now, I'm going to assume that if you are listening to this podcast, you're understanding most of what I'm saying, you're past that point. But this is great advice to give to someone else. 80% input, 20% output. Just absorbing the language every day. This isn't just talking about vocabulary lists and studying grammar. It's listening. It's reading. Just taking in as much as you can. 80% input, 20% output. And this is because you need to build that foundation first. You've got to get a solid foundation. But did you notice here? 20% output. At the very beginning stages. Output. Speaking. Writing. Mostly intake, but we got to, from the very beginning, start putting it out. Intermediate level, which I say is where many of you are, we want a 60 to 70% input with a 30 to 40% output. 60 to 70% input, 30 to 40% output. And this is because really, if we think about time and a lot of things, it doesn't allow for a lot of output, but we want to start speaking a lot more. We want a lot more output, but we got to keep feeding our brain. We don't want to stop feeding our brain. So for that intermediate level, 60 to 70% input, we still got to be taking in so much more advanced vocabulary, more podcasts, more videos, more reading. But We want 30 to 40% output. We want to be speaking. We want to be using the language as much as possible. What about when we're at an advanced level, which is probably where most of you are? 50-50. 50% input, 50% output. Refinement comes from active use. And this is where the balance lies. And of course, this isn't like fact. But ask yourself now, is my output as much as my input? Is my input as much as my output? Honestly examine your situation and see where you are and think, right, have I got room to change this a little bit? Do I need to just mix this up a little bit? Am I perhaps working in an English field and all I'm doing is putting out? All I'm doing is speaking. Can you create more time for input? More listening, more reading, more vocabulary? And that is how we continually progress. So just think to yourself now, what is my input versus output balance? And is it correct, or does it need a little bit of adjustment? And that's how I would say to improve your English in 2026. Your input and output balance. Only you know where you are, or perhaps if you're having lessons, you can ask a teacher, what would you say? But one thing to remember is that quality matters a lot more than quantity. So if you think, right, I need to do 30% more input, it's not about just going and reading as many pages as you can to get to that 30%. Not all input is equal. Better input is slightly above your level. It's interesting to you. It's exposure to natural phrases, natural English, and you enjoy it. Better output. It's regular, it's structured, it's corrected, and it adapts, it changes wherever necessary. So here's kind of like a practical strategy, simple and effective. If you're thinking about it now, you can just kind of take this with a pinch of salt. If you want steady improvement, daily, 20 to 40 minutes of listening or reading, and then 10 to 20 minutes of speaking or writing. It's not too much, but I put it like that so it's realistic. Consistency beats intensity. Input builds your English. Output proves, improves, and strengthens it. Sorry if you're watching along there, a little bit of a spelling mistake. I can't change it. So output improves and strengthens it. So if you feel stuck, struggling to understand, increase your input. If you're understanding but not speaking very well, increase your output. So if you're thinking at the moment, I'm really struggling to understand everything that's being said, increase your input. Just listen more, watch more, read more. If you're understanding everything but you're really struggling to speak, well, find ways to increase that output. And that's a good kind of indicator of where you are. But remember, the best learners of English, or the way we improve, isn't by choosing one, it's combining both strategically with balance. So that's really how I would say to improve your English this year. There's not one tried and tested way, but perhaps something you can think about and keep evaluating is, where is your balance? Where are you in that scale? And do you need to just change it a little bit? But isn't it true that in life we seem to have so much output? I find that. And as you get older in life, or you become an adult, I don't know if it's just me, but you get less and less time just to take in, just to, your own input. And at this point, I wanted to say, it's not all about study or improving. Sometimes it's just about doing what you enjoy, taking time for yourself. So, okay, we think about that theory of input and output balance when it comes to learning English, but it can also apply to our career. But it could also just apply to relaxing and enjoying life. How much time do we take for input and relax and unwind? Is our balance off? And my wife and I, we're trying to do this a little bit at the moment. We're trying to be a bit better at scheduling. but not just scheduling all the stuff that's got to be done, because that's always going to be there. There's always something else to do. There's always another task. But we're just trying to schedule more time for input that we want. A film that we want to watch. A book that we want to read. For goodness sake, going out for a walk in nature is input. You're taking things in. And maybe our balance is off a little bit. And sometimes life doesn't allow that to change. But that might be something to think about as well. Throughout 2026, what's my daily life input and output balance? Am I getting the input that I want? The input that helps me to relax, to unwind, and just enjoy life a little bit. So yeah, just a thought to think about this year. I'm hoping that by next week's episode, maybe not next week, maybe the week after, that my office will be decorated. Oh, I've got a little sample of the colour to show you, but I think I've left it outside. I have. So it's going to be, so the walls, so this wall, the back wall, and that wall are going to be like a dark blue. It's really nice. And I'm thinking of like a little lamp here. I don't know. You got any suggestions just how to make this background look a bit nicer, a bit more professional? But it's going to be like a dark blue. It's really annoying me because I prepared that sample, but I can't find it. So hopefully that will be ready. No, it's not going to be next week. I'm going to be honest with you. We've got some friends staying next weekend, so that's not going to happen. But the week after, it will happen. And if you're wondering what's on my T-shirt, by the way, if you are watching, it's a Disney World T-shirt. So if you are a Disney World fan or a Disney fan, like myself and my wife are, that's it. And this T-shirt has all 4 parks in it. You got Animal Kingdom, Magic Kingdom, Epcot, Hollywood Studios. Love this T-shirt. I think you can get it online if you are a Disney World fan, which I imagine the majority of you aren't, but just in case. So I'm hoping that next week this will be decorated and have a bit of a different background, just spice it up a little bit. I really do want to make this look more professional, especially now that I've got this fancy new camera, which I think looks great. What do you think? You liking it? Do you think the quality's improved? Yeah, let me know. One thing I'm also working on in 2026 that I'm struggling with is limiting my coffee intake. I got in the habit of 2025 of drinking way too much coffee, so I'm trying to limit it a little bit. So I'm just having 1 filter coffee in the morning now. And it was difficult. For the first few weeks, I really, really struggled. But now it's getting a bit better. I'm getting used to it. Just that 1 coffee in the morning, being strict with myself, and that's it. And apart from that, just drinking water throughout the day, and I genuinely feel better for it. And I find that 1 coffee I do have has greater effect. Have you got anything you're trying to put into practice this year? Have you got any goals? Have you got anything like that? Or just little life changes that you think, I'm trying to do that this year? Let me know in the comments. Now, before we conclude, there's one thing I did want to mention, and this is a bit of a call to George Crocus. So I think, got to be about a year and a half ago, I read one of his poems on the podcast called Collecting Pebbles. I absolutely love the poem. It resonates with me in so many different ways. I think it's a superb poem. And recently I found a comment on one of those videos from the poet himself, George Crocus, and it was very, very kind, showing that he appreciated it, the analysis of the poem, and that, he enjoyed watching that episode. So one thing I would love is to interview George on the podcast. I would love to have a chat with him. I would love just to pick his brains on poetry, his writing process. So if he is at all listening to this episode, George, I would love to have a chat with you, mate. Love just to, just pick your brains on that poem and you in general. And if anyone knows any way of reaching out to him, that would be really cool. So we don't have a lot of guests on the podcast anymore, but I would love to have George join me. That would be a real pleasure and an honour of mine. So that was the February Natter. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have a good week. Got an interesting episode planned for next week that I think you'll like. So looking forward to that one. Please don't forget to subscribe and follow. And if you can like on all platforms and leave a comment, it just really does help me to keep going and to grow as a channel. So thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing week. Stay safe, and I'll see you next Sunday. Have a good one, guys.